marital affairs were not a distraction from his writing, but an essential stimulus. It's hard not to feel that there is a great deal we're not being told, wrote Theo Tate in a review of my biography for the London Review of Books. He was right, of course. In his review, Tate differentiated between the first half of the book, which he wrote does exactly what you want a biography of a novelist to do, and the second half, which he found much less revealing. At a certain point, the reader is banished from Cornwell's life. That point was the moment David met Jane, who became his second wife in 1972. As Tate observed, she took on the role of gatekeeper, and from then on, the gate was kept tightly shut. Tate was one of several reviewers to perceive that the book was the outcome of a struggle between author and subject, a truce between candor and guile, as Robert McCrum put it in The Observer. My book benefited from access to my subject and his archive, but this came at a cost. In theory, I was free to write what I thought fit, but in practice, I was constrained. There was the obvious factor that it would have been difficult to proceed had le Carré withdrawn his cooperation, as seemed possible at one stage. Given that he was so protective of his privacy, I found myself questioning why David had agreed to cooperate with me after seeing off several suitors in the past. Inasmuch as I was able to answer the question, I came to believe that he had two partly contradictory motives. He wanted a serious biography commensurate with his stature as a serious writer, and he wanted to be able to control what was in it. One seasoned le Carré watcher believes that he encouraged the biography because he hoped to find out about himself, only to recoil in dismay when I held up the mirror. Undertaking a life of a living person is always a compromise. Even an unauthorized biographer is inhibited by the law of libel. As biographers of T.S. Eliot and Ted Hughes have discovered to their cost, the law of copyright is another inhibitor when writing about a writer because, broadly speaking, the writings of the living, or recently dead, may not be quoted without permission. The position is more ambiguous when a biography is being written with the consent of the subject, or even more so when the subject cooperates with the biographer. In a previous book, I explored the tension between the two. The subject is, almost by definition, the senior figure. The biographer is in a subordinate position. Each is thinking about posterity. In any agreement between them, there will be an element of quid pro quo. While the subject remains alive, he or she retains some measure of control, even if the restraints are rarely visible. But the biographer is likely to have the last word. Of course, it is helpful to the biographer to meet and to become familiar with his or her subject, though not so helpful as one might imagine. But the more you come to know someone, the less inclined you are to upset them. Familiarity with your subject can be both an advantage and a handicap. The recent history of biography offers contrasting precedents. James Atlas's memoir, The Shadow in the Garden, A Biographer's Tale, 2017, recounts in excruciating detail the succession of mishaps and mistakes he made in writing his life of Saul Bellow, like mine published while his subject was still alive in 2000. On the other hand, Patrick French was able to publish The World is What It Is, 2008, his authorized biography of V.S. Naipaul during his subject's lifetime, despite the fact that his book revealed damaging details about Naipaul's private behavior. A great writer requires a great biographer, George Packer wrote in his New York Times review of French's book, and a great biography must tell the truth. I had been aware from the outset that dealing with David wasn't going to be easy. Robert Harris, who had been commissioned to write a life of le Carré almost 20 years earlier, warned me that I would never be able to publish in his lifetime. As it turned out, he was wrong, but only partially so. At the start, David was welcoming, and we were immediately on first-name terms, so friendly that I often had to remind myself that we weren't really friends at all, and that the cordiality could be withdrawn at any time, as I found it happened to others who thought of themselves as his friends. Perhaps it helped that I was, and remain, an admirer of his work. In my opinion, he is a writer of high class, worthy of comparison with the best. Assuming that people are still reading novels in 100 years' time, I think there is a good chance that they will be reading le Carré. For me, he is the definitive writer of the Cold War era. More than that, he is, as Blake Morrison has put it, a laureate